Hi, it's Ahmed again, with another book review. I know we're in the middle of coronavirus and everything else that's going on, and I've been under the stay-at-home um, order from the governor, so been staying at home for the last, I don't know, 3 weeks now because I was self-quarantined before because I was afraid that I may have been in touch with someone with the coronavirus. I was flying a lot, so this is the most fun that I get to have, get outside, make a little video. So in the last week, there's been a lot of news. Finally, the administration seems to be waking up to the fact that it is not a hoax and that you cannot make certain things go away by calling it a hoax, or by pretending that it will go away or with good hopes. Um, I met Michael Lewis last year at a conference. Michael Lewis, as you may know, is the famous author of Flash Boys, Moneyball, and many other of my most favorite books around math, business. Um, he had just written this book called The Fifth Risk, and I actually got a signed copy, and I got a signed Audible, which is something weird that I do when I meet authors, is I get them to sign my iPhone on the Audible. So he signed a copy of my Audible audiobook for not Flash Boys, for The Fifth Risk. The Fifth Risk is a very interesting book. At the time that I read it, you could clearly tell that Michael Lewis was worried about a new president taking over, a president who's been very different from other presidents, an administration like none other, um, and it was unnerving reading it, right? Just learning how the Trump administration kind of wasn't like prior administrations that had a lot of people who were insiders because the Trump administration took what they said seriously. They were outsiders. They were coming in to, you know, shake up the system that was very corrupt, that's very inept. And I kind of subscribe to some of the views. I've never thought about government as being the most efficient vehicle of delivering services, but at the same time, the United States government is a marvel. I grew up in Bangladesh as a kid, where the government wasn't nearly as stable, and Bangladeshis would often marvel at the government of the United States that took care of people, that had good systems in place. And as much as coronavirus sucks and staying at home sucks, you know, it's the right thing to do right now, and that's the right thing for a government to do. Growing up in Bangladesh, I actually experienced these things called hartals, which is where general strikes, nobody goes out of their house, sometimes as long as 7 days. So I was just talking to my mom about like how this should seem really weird, but it just harkens back to my youth when we weren't able to get out of the house for long periods of time. That was government dysfunction, though, whereas this one is much more planned, although some would argue that this is also government dysfunction. So at the time when I read the book, when I met Michael Lewis, who's an awesome guy, he's a very animated person, and at the time when I met him, I was like, okay, yeah, he has his beliefs, I like listening to different viewpoints. But since then, I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking like, you know what? Yeah, he talked about all of these jobs that were cut, but I wonder if somehow the current administration, isn't proving the point of many fiscal conservatives, that the government's really bloated, doesn't really need all these departments. Who the fuck needs to guard the nuclear arsenal after all, right? I say that tongue in cheek. Uh, you should guard the nuclear arsenal and do some of these other things that the government does. But he was pointing out that there are systematic things that the U.S. government, that the federal government has been kind of holding together behind the scenes. It's like an IT department at a company. You know, Nobody really gives the IT department credit when things run smoothly. But as soon as the network crashes and the Wi-Fi stops, everybody starts blaming the IT department. It's a shame because the IT department often works really hard to make sure everything runs smoothly, and they're not getting in your way. So in some ways, the government possibly serves that function, but it's not very visible to all of us. And so I honestly wondered, like, hey, maybe a lot of these departments aren't needed, right? Almost all of my dealings with government entities have been frustrating. So I read Michael Lewis's book. I was like, yeah, I can understand. Maybe he's just a little too frustrated. But this coronavirus thing has me thinking, holy shit, maybe he was right. Maybe, like most of his other books, there's some prophetic elements to this book as well that maybe cutting government out. Like, yeah, it's got inefficiencies, but there are reasons why you need good governance, right? Or good governments as well. And this coronavirus epidemic, where the government clearly did not take the early warning signs seriously, could point to some validity in Michael Lewis's arguments in his book, The Fifth Risk. I would highly recommend the book. Take it with a grain of salt. It's going to make your heart race. It's going to make you freak out and panic that we are all going to die, which will happen anyways. Um, I will prefer no opinion, one way or another. I'm telling you honestly, when I read it, I was a bit skeptical that it was a little too negative. But given current events, given recent events, seeing how flat-footed and how unprepared the U.S. government seems to be, an entity that I personally have always regarded as being pretty capable of getting things right, uh, that may be my personal bias also. There may be something more to Michael Lewis's Fifth Risk, and it may be a book that is worth reading now, just to get a grasp of what's going on. It's not a terribly dense book, but I think it's a, you know, it's a pretty relevant book right now. And let me know what you think. Let me know what your take is on it. I hope that the truth is somewhere in the middle. Maybe we don't need as much government, but zero is probably not the right answer either. So I think everybody's kind of coming to that, including the Trump administration. That's taken some very commendable steps in preventing the virus, keeping the economy from collapsing. I mean, this stuff truly is unprecedented. So I don't want to appear to like be bashing the administration. There are a lot of hardworking people in government, and they are trying their best. But the Fifth Risk is definitely an interesting book, uh, even for the preppers and others, right? There's always these systematic risks that are at place. We like to think things are very stable. They're not. Um, and it's a good idea to always keep that in the back of your head when you're doing 10, 30, 100-year planning, that, things are going to change significantly. And there are things that you haven't thought about yet, um, that are the fifth risk. I hope you enjoy the book. Thanks for listening.